Hello and welcome to Bookspot. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we'll continue our reading of Between Planets by Robert Heinlein. Our hero Don is on a ship to Venus because he couldn't get on a ship to Mars, where his parents are, and he wouldn't be on the ship to Venus if it weren't for the help of his friend, the Venusian dragon, who goes by the name of Sir Isaac Newton. But Don did not get to see his Venerian friend at once. He was herded into the Nautilus along with Venus-bound passengers from the Glory Road and a handful of technicians from Circumterra, whose loyalties lay with Venus rather than with Earth. By the time he discovered that Sir Isaac had been transshipped to the Valkyrie, it was too late to do anything about it. The flag of the task force commander, High Commodore Higgins, was shifted from Circumterra back to the Nautilus, and Higgins moved at once to carry out the rest of his coup. The storming of Circumterra had been managed almost without bloodshed. It had depended on timing and surprise. Now the rest of the operation must be completed before any dislocation in ship schedules would be noticed on Earth. The Nautilus and the Valkyrie had already been prepared for their long jumps. The Spring Tides crew had removed to be sent to Earth and the crew supplied from the task force. She herself was fueled and provisioned for deep space. Although designed for the short jump to Luna, she was quite capable of making the trip to Venus. Space travel is not a matter of distance, but of gravity potential levels. The jump from Circumterra to Venus required less expenditure of energy than did the terrible business of fighting up through Earth's field from New Chicago to Circumterra. The Spring Tide shoved off in a leisurely, economical parabola. She would make the trip to Venus in freefall all the way. The Valkyrie blasted away to shape a fast, almost flat hyperboloid orbit. She would arrive as soon or sooner than the Nautilus. The Nautilus was last to leave, for High Commodore Higgins had one more thing to do before destroying the station, a television broadcast on a globe-wide network. All global broadcasts originated in or were relayed through the communications center of Circumterra. Since the Nautilus had touched in at Circumterra, a cosmic Trojan horse, the regular broadcasts had been allowed to continue uninterrupted. The Commodore's G6 staff officer, propaganda and nerve warfare, picked as the time for the Commodore's announcement to Earth of the coup the time ordinarily given over to Steve Brody Says, the most widely heard global news commentator. Mr. Brody immediately followed the immensely popular Kallikak family serial drama, an added advantage audience-wise. The Glory Road had been allowed at last to blast off for Earth with her load of refugees, but with her radios wrecked. The Nautilus lay off in space, 100 miles outside, hanging in a parking orbit, waiting. Inside the space station, now utterly devoid of life, the television center continuing its functions unattended. The Commodore's speech had already been canned. Its tape was threaded into the programmer and would start as soon as the Throb Show was over. Don watched it from a recreation lounge of the liner, along with 100-odd other civilians. All eyes were on a big television tank set in the end of the compartment. A monitoring beam, jury-rigged for the purpose, brought the cast from Circumterra to the Nautilus, and the radio watch in the ship was passing it on throughout the ship so that the passengers and crew might see and hear it. As the day's serial episode closed, Celeste Kallikak had been arrested for suspected husband murder, Buddy Kallikak was still in the hospital and not expected to live, Father Kallikak was still missing, and Ma Kallikak was herself suspected of cheating on ration stamps, but she was facing it all bravely, serene in her knowledge that only the good die young. After the usual commercial plug, the only soap with guaranteed vitamin content for greater vivacity, the tank faded into Steve Brody's trademark, a rocket trail condensing into his features while a voice boomed, "Steve Brody with tomorrow's news today." It cut suddenly, the tank went empty, and a voice said, "We interrupt this broadcast to bring you a special news flash." The tank filled again, this time with the features of Commodore Higgins. His face lacked the synthetic smile obligatory for all who speak in public telecast. His manner and voice were grim. "I am High Commodore Higgins, commanding Task Force Emancipation of the High Guard, Venus Republic. The High Guard has seized Earth's satellite station, Circumterra. We now have all of Earth's cities utterly at our mercy." He paused to let it sink in. Don thought it over and did not like the thought. Everybody knew that Circumterra carried enough A-bomb rockets to smear any force or combination of forces that could be raised to oppose the Federation. The exact number of rocket bombs carried was a military secret, variously estimated between 200 and 1,000. A rumor had spread through the civilians in the Nautilus that the High Guard had found 732 bombs ready to go, with component parts for many more, plus enough deuterium and tritium to make up about a dozen Hell bombs. Whether the rumor was true or not, Circumterra certainly held enough bombs to turn the Terran Federation into a radioactive abattoir. No doubt with so much underground, many inhabitants of cities would survive, but any city once bombed would have to be abandoned. The military effect would be the same, and many would die. How many? 40 millions? 50 millions? Don did not know. The Commodore went on. "Mercifully we stay our hand. Earth's cities will not be bombed. The free citizens of Venus Republic have no wish to slaughter their cousins still on Terra. Our only purpose is to establish our own independence, to manage our own affairs, to throw off the crushing yoke of absentee ownership and of taxation without representation, which has bled us poor. In so doing, in so taking our stand as free men, we call on all oppressed and impoverished nations everywhere to follow our lead, accept our help. Look up into the sky. Swimming there above you is the very station from which I now address you. The fat and stupid rulers of the Federation have made of Circumterra an overseer's whip. The threat of this military base in the sky has protected their empire from the just wrath of their victims for more than 50 years. We now crush it. In a matter of minutes, this scandal in the clean skies, this pistol pointed at the head of men everywhere on your planet, will cease to exist. Step out of doors, watch the sky. Watch a new sun blaze briefly, and know that its light is the light of liberty, inviting all Earth to free itself. Subject peoples of Earth, we free men of the Free Republic of Venus salute you with that sign." Commodore continued to sit and gaze steadily into the eyes of each of his colossal audience, while the heart-lifting beat of "Morning Star of Hope" followed his words. Don did not recognize the anthem of the new nation, but he could not help but feel its surging promise. Suddenly the tank went dead, and at the same instant there was a flash of light so intense that it leaked through the shuttered ports and tormented the optic nerve. Don was still shaking his head from it when over the ship's announcing system came the call, "Safe to unshutter." A petty officer stationed at the compartment's viewport was already cranking the metal shield out of the way. Don crowded in and looked. A second sun blazed white and swelled visibly as he watched. What on earth would have been, so many terrible times had been, a climbing mushroom cloud, was here in open space a perfect geometrical sphere, growing unbelievably. It swelled still larger, dropping from limelight white to silvery violet, became blotched with purple, red, and flame, and still it grew until it blanked out Earth beyond it. At the time it was transformed into a radioactive cosmic cloud, Circumterra had been passing over, or opposite, the North Atlantic. The swollen incandescent cloud was visible to most of the habitable portions of the globe, a burning symbol in the sky. Chapter 7. Detour. Immediately after the destruction of Circumterra, the ship's warning signal howled and loudspeakers bellowed, ordering all hands to acceleration stations. The Nautilus blasted away, shaping her orbit for the weary trip to Venus. When she was up to speed and spin had been placed on her to permit sure footing, the control room secured from blast stations. Don unstrapped and hurried to the radio room. Twice he had to argue to get past sentries. He found the door open. Everyone inside seemed busy and paid him no attention. He hesitated, then stepped inside. A long hand reached out and grabbed him by the scruff. "Hey, where the deuce do you think you're going?" Don answered humbly, "I just want to send a message." "You do, eh? What do you think of that, Charlie?" His captor appealed to a soldier who was bending over a rig. The second soldier pushed one earphone up. "Looks like a saboteur, probably an A-bomb in each pocket." The officer wandered out of an inner room. "What goes on here?" "Sneaked in, sir. Says he wants to send a message." The officer looked Don up and down. "Sorry, no can do. Radio silence. No traffic outgoing." "But," Don answered desperately, "I've just got to." Quickly he explained his predicament. "I've got to let them know where I am, sir." The officer shook his head. "We couldn't raise Mars even if we were not in radio silence." "No, sir, but you could beam Luna for relay to Mars." "Yes, I suppose we could, but we won't. See here, young fella, I'm sorry about your troubles, but there is no possibility, simply none at all, that the commanding officer will permit silence to be broken for any reason, even one much more important than yours. The safety of the ship comes first." Don thought about it. "I suppose so," he agreed forlornly. "However, I wouldn't worry too much. Your parents will find out where you are." "Huh? I don't see how. They'll think I'm headed for Mars." "No, they don't, or won't shortly. There is no secret now about what has happened. The whole system knows it. They can find out that you got as far as Circumterra. They can find out that the Glory Road did not fetch you back. By elimination, you must be on your way to Venus. I imagine that they are querying Interplanet about you right now." The officer turned away and said, "Wilkins, paint a sign for the door saying radio silence, no messages accepted. We don't want every civilian in the ship barging in here trying to send greetings to his Aunt Hattie." Don bunked in a third-class compartment with 36 men and a few boys. Some passengers who had paid for better accommodations complained. Don himself had first-class passage booked for the Valkyrie and Mars, but he was glad he had not been silly enough to object when he saw the disgruntled returning with their tails between their legs. First-class accommodations up forward were occupied by the High Guard. His couch was comfortable enough, and a space voyage, dull under any circumstances, is less dull in the noise and gossip of a bunk room than it is in the quiet of a first-class stateroom. During the first week out, the senior surgeon announced that any who wished could avail themselves of cold sleep. Within a day or two, the bunk room was half deserted, the missing passengers having been drugged and chilled and stowed in sleep tanks aft, there to dream away the long weeks ahead. Don did not take cold sleep. He listened to a bunk room discussion full of half-facts as to whether or not cold sleep counted against a man's lifetime. "Look at it this way," one passenger pontificated. "You've got so long to live, right? It's built into your genes. Barring accidents, you live just that long. But when they put you in the freezer, your body slows down. Your clock stops, so to speak. That time doesn't count against you. If you had 80 years coming to you, now you've got 80 years plus 3 months or whatever. So I'm taking it." You couldn't be wronger, he was answered. More wrong, I mean. What you've done is chop 3 months right out of your life. Not for me. You're crazy. I'm taking it. Suit yourself. And another thing. The passenger who opposed it leaned forward and spoke confidentially so that only the entire bunk room could hear. They say that the boys with the bars up front question you while you're going under. You know why? Because the Commodore thinks that spies slipped aboard at Circumterra. Don did not care which one was right. He was too much alive to relish deliberately dying for a time simply to stave off the boredom of a long trip. But the last comment startled him. Spies? Was it possible that the IBI had agents right under the noses of the High Guard? Yet the IBI was supposed to be able to slip in anywhere. He looked around at his fellow passengers, wondering which one might be traveling under a false identity. He put it out of his mind. At least the IBI was no longer interested in him. Had Don not known that he was in the Nautilus headed for Venus, he might well have imagined himself in the Valkyrie headed for Mars. The ships were of the same class, and one piece of empty space looks like another. The sun grew daily a little larger rather than smaller, but one does not look directly at the sun, not even from Mars. The ship's routine followed the same Greenwich day kept by any liner in space. Breakfast came sharp on the bell. The ship's position was announced each noon. The lights were dimmed at night. Even the presence of soldiers on the ship was not conspicuous. They kept to their own quarters forward, and civilians were not allowed there except on business. The ship was 42 days out before Don again had any reason to go forward, to get a cut finger dressed in a sick bay. On his way aft, he felt a hand on his shoulder and turned. He recognized Sergeant McMasters. The sergeant was wearing the star of a master-at-arms, a ship's policeman. "What are you doing?" he demanded, "skulking around here?" Don held up his damaged digit. "I wasn't skulking. I was getting this attended to." McMasters looked at it. "Mash your finger, eh? Well, you're in the wrong passageway. This leads to the bomb room, not the passengers' quarters. Say, I've seen you before, haven't I?" "Sure." "I remember. You're the lad who thought he was going to Mars." "I'm still going to Mars." "So? You seem to favor the long way round by 100 million miles. Speaking of the long way around, you haven't explained why I find you headed toward the bomb room." Don felt himself getting red. "I don't know where the bomb room is. If I'm in the wrong passage, show me the right one." "Come with me." The sergeant led him down 2 decks where the spin of the ship made them slightly heavier and conducted Don into an office. "Sit down. The duty officer will be along." Don remained standing. "I don't want to see the duty officer. I want to go back to my bunk room." "Sit down. Sit down, I said. I remember your case. Maybe you were just turned around, but you could take the wrong turn on purpose." Don swallowed his annoyance and sat. "No offense," said Masters. "How about a slug of solvent?" He went to a coffee warmer and produced 2 cups. Don hesitated, then accepted one. It was the Venerian bean, black and bitter and very strong. Don found himself beginning to like McMasters. The sergeant sipped his, grimaced, then said, "You must be born lucky. You ought to be a corpse by now." "Huh?" "You were scheduled to go back in the Glory Road, weren't you?" "Well?" "I don't track you." "Didn't the news filter aft? The Glory didn't make it." "Huh? Crashed?" "Hardly. The Federation groundhogs got jumpy and blasted her out of the sky. Couldn't raise her and figured she was booby-trapped, I guess. Anyhow, they blasted her." "Oh." "Which is why I say you were born lucky, seeing as how you were supposed to go back in her." "I wasn't. I'm headed for Mars." McMasters stared at him, then laughed. "Boy, have you got a one-track mind. You're as bad as a move-over." "Maybe so, but I'm still going to Mars." The sergeant put down his cup. Why don't you wise up? This war is going to last maybe 10 or 15 years. Chances are there won't be a scheduled ship to Mars in that whole time. Well, I'll make it somehow, but how do you figure it'll last so long? McMasters stopped to light up. Studied any history? Some. Remember how the American colonies got loose from England? They piddled along for 8 years, fighting just now and then, yet England was so strong that she should have been able to lick the colonies any weekend. Why didn't she? Don did not know. Well, McMasters answered, you may not be a student of history, but Commodore Higgins is. He planned this strike. Ask him about any rebellion that ever happened. He'll tell you why it succeeded or why it failed. England didn't lick the colonies because she was up to her ears in bigger wars elsewhere. The American rebellion was just a police action, not important, but she couldn't give proper attention to it. After a while, it got to be just too expensive and too much trouble, so England gave up and recognized their independence. You figure this the same way? Yes, because Commodore Higgins gave it a shove in the right direction. Figured on form, the Venus Republic can't win against the Federation. Mind you, I'm just as patriotic as the next, but I can face facts. Venus hasn't a fraction of the population of the Federation, nor 1% of its wealth. Venus can't win unless the Federation is too busy to fight, which it is, or will be soon. Don thought about it. I guess I'm stupid. Didn't you grasp the significance of blowing up Circumterra? In one raid, the Commodore had Earth absolutely helpless. He could have bombed any or all of Terra's cities. But what good would that have done? It would simply have gotten the whole globe sore at us. As it is, we've got 2/3 of the people of Earth cheering for us. Not only cheering, but feeling frisky and ready to rebel themselves now that Circumterra isn't sitting up there in the sky ready to launch bombs at the first sign of unrest. It'll take the Federation years to pacify the associate nations, if ever. Oh, the Commodore is a sly one. McMasters glanced up. Attention, he called and got to his feet. A lieutenant of the High Guard was in the doorway. He said, that was a very interesting lecture, Professor, but you should save it for the classroom. Not Professor, Lieutenant, McMasters said earnestly. Sergeant, if you please. Very well, Sergeant, but don't revert to type. He turned to Don. Who is this, and why is he loafing here? Waiting for you, sir, McMasters explained the circumstances. I see, answered the duty officer. He said to Don, do you waive your right not to testify against yourself? Don looked puzzled. He means, explained McMasters, do we try the gimmick on you, or would you rather finish the trip in the brig? The gimmick? Lie detector. Oh, go ahead, I've got nothing to hide. Wish I could say as much. Sit down over there. McMasters opened a cupboard, fitted electrodes to Don's head and a bladder gauge to his forearm. Now, he said, tell me the real reason why you were skulking around the bomb room. Don stuck to his story. McMasters asked more questions while the lieutenant watched a wigglescope back of Don's head. Presently he said, that's all, Sergeant. Chase him back where he belongs. Right, come along. They left the room together. Once out of earshot, McMasters continued, as I was saying when we were so crudely interrupted, this is why you can expect a long war. The status will stay quo while the Federation is busy at home with insurrections and civil disorder. From time to time, they'll send a boy to do a man's job, will give the boy lumps and send him home. After a few years of that, the Federation will decide that we are costing more than we are worth and will recognize us as a free nation. In the meantime, there will be no ships running to Mars. Too bad. I'll get there, Don insisted. You'll have to walk. They reached G-deck. Don looked around and said, I know my way from here. I must have gone down a deck too many. 2 decks, McMasters corrected. But I'll go with you until you're back where you belong. There is one way you might get to Mars, probably the only way. Huh? How? Tell me how. Figure it out. There won't be any passenger runs, not till the war is over. but it is a dead cinch that both the Federation and the Republic will send task forces to Mars eventually, each trying to preempt the facilities there for the home team. If I were you, I'd enlist in the High Guard. Not the Middle Guard, not the ground forces, but the High Guard. Don thought about it. But I couldn't stand much chance of getting to go along, would I? Know anything about barracks politics? Get yourself a job as a clerk. If you've any skill at kissing the proper foot, a clerk's job will keep you around main base. You'll be close to the rumor factory, and you'll know when they finally get around to sending a ship to Mars. Kiss the proper foot again, and put yourself on the roster. That's the only way you are likely to get to Mars. Here's your door. Mind you don't get lost up forward again. So, there is a way to Mars, if you're willing to join the Venusian military. Maybe Don is. We'll continue next time.